Tap like and subscribe right now. Because the official inflation headline just told America everything's under control, and yet the one bill you can't escape, the grocery bill, just sent a very different message, and it happened fast. Turn on notifications too, because the next CPI release lands February 11, 2026. And when essentials move month to month, the story can change before most people even notice. Alright, let's get into it. I'm going to walk you through what the government's newest inflation report actually said, what it quietly admitted, and why so many people hear inflation is 2.7% and feel like they're being gaslit by their own receipts. Because yes, the official Consumer Price Index, December 2025, shows inflation at 2.7% over the last 12 months, and that's the number that's going to get repeated on TV like it's the end of the story. But the real story is not living inside that single number. Here's the official top line. The Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers, CPI, increased 0.3% in December on a seasonally adjusted basis. Over the last 12 months, the All Items Index increased 2.7% before seasonal adjustment. If you stop there, you might think, okay, maybe we're back to normal. Maybe the nightmare years are behind us. Maybe that brutal cost of living surge is fading into the rearview mirror. But keep listening, because the report itself immediately tells you what actually drove this month's increase. And it wasn't some luxury category that only affects a small group of people. It was shelter, it was food, and it was energy, exactly the things you can't opt out of. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says the shelter index rose 0.4% in December and was the largest factor in the all items monthly increase. That matters because shelter isn't a nice to have. Shelter is rent. It's a roof. It's the baseline cost of existing in a modern economy. The report also says the food index increased 0.7% over the month. And not only that, the food at home index, your groceries, rose 0.7% too. And the food away from home index, restaurants, rose 0.7% as well. So if you're trying to save money by cooking more, you still get hit. If you're exhausted and grabbing something quick, you still get hit. Now, the first emotional reaction many people have is, wait, 0.7% for groceries in a single month. That's huge, and whether economists want to call it huge or not, it is absolutely the kind of move that families feel instantly, because you don't buy groceries once a year. You buy them all the time. It's not like a car purchase where you can delay it for 6 months if you need to. It's weekly, sometimes daily, and when prices jump there, your budget doesn't get time to adjust. And when the grocery category jumps the same month, shelter rises again, and energy rises again, people don't experience that as 2.7% inflation. They experience it as financial suffocation, like the walls are closing in. Let's talk about why that 2.7% number feels disconnected from reality. Because the CPI says its fine talking point is going to be used as a weapon in debates, and it shouldn't be. The CPI is a basket-weighted average across a huge range of goods and services. And when you take an average, you can hide extremes. Some categories can be falling while essentials are rising. And the final average can look calm while real life feels violent. That's the trick of aggregates. They can be statistically true and emotionally dishonest at the same time. The report says that excluding food and energy, what people call core inflation, the index rose 0.2% in December and is up 2.6% over the last 12 months. So even the core number is still in the same neighborhood, meaning this isn't just gasoline volatility giving you optical illusions. And while some categories dropped, including communication, used cars and trucks, and household furnishings and operations, that doesn't help you much. If the money you save on a cheaper used car price index doesn't offset the money you lose every single week at the grocery store. Most households can't optimize their consumption basket to match what the CPI assumes. Now let's go deeper into food, because this is where the story becomes very clear, and honestly, a little unsettling. The BLS says 5 of the 6 major grocery store food group indexes increased in December. That's not one weird item. That's broad-based pressure across the store. And the index for other food at home rose 1.6% over the month. When you hear other food at home, it sounds vague, but this category covers a lot of packaged and prepared items that people rely on, things that are practical, fast, and often central to feeding a family on a schedule. A 1.6% jump in a single month in a major grocery grouping is the kind of thing that quietly forces people into trade-offs: smaller portions, cheaper brands, fewer options, or going without. The report also tells us cereals and bakery products rose 0.6% in December. Fruits and vegetables rose 0.5%. Non-alcoholic beverages rose 0.4%. Dairy and related products rose 0.9%. That's multiple aisles moving in the wrong direction at the same time. So when someone says, "It's not that bad," you can always substitute. What they're missing is that substitution gets harder when the entire store is inflating together. There was one major grocery group that declined. Meats, poultry, fish, and eggs decreased 0.2% in December. And the report says that happened because eggs fell 8.2% in a single month. That's real. And for some families, it's relief. But a drop in eggs doesn't erase a broad rise elsewhere. And it doesn't erase the psychological effect of seeing multiple staples creep up at once. And it also doesn't erase the year-over-year picture because when you zoom out to 12 months, the index for food rose 3.1%. Over the last year, groceries rose 2.4% over the last 12 months, and food away from home rose 4.1% over the last year. That restaurant number matters because there are a lot of people who don't have the time, the kitchen setup, or the energy to cook everything from scratch. And when restaurants rise faster than groceries, that hits working people particularly hard. Now, I want you to notice what the report is saying about the year-over-year grocery categories too, because this is where the slow grind becomes visible. The meats, poultry, fish, and eggs index rose 3.9% over the last 12 months. Other food at home increased 2.7% over the same period. Non-alcoholic beverages rose 5.1% over the year. Cereals and bakery products increased 1.5% over the 12 months. Fruits and vegetables rose 0.5% over the year. Dairy and related products actually decreased 0.9% over that same period. Which is interesting because it shows how uneven this can be. Some things truly do cool while others run hot. But if your household happens to be heavy on non-alcoholic beverages, meats, packaged foods, or restaurant spending, your lived inflation rate is going to feel much higher than 2.7%. And I want to say something bluntly, because it's the emotional core of why this matters. Even when inflation slows, prices don't go back to where they were. They just rise more slowly from a higher base. The report is describing changes, not rewinding history. So if someone feels like groceries are still expensive, they're correct. Even if year-over-year inflation is lower than it was at the peak, that's why the public mood stays sour. The economy can improve in the abstract while the standard of living remains strained in the concrete. Now, let's shift to energy, because this is another quiet stressor in the report, especially for winter. The energy index increased 0.3% in December. Gasoline decreased 0.5% over the month on a seasonally adjusted basis, and over the last 12 months, gasoline is down 3.4%. That sounds like good news, and it is for drivers, but it can be deceptive, because the thing you buy at the pump is not the only energy cost in your life. The report says the electricity index declined 0.1% in December, but electricity is still up 6.7% over the last 12 months. And utility, piped gas service, what many people rely on for heating, rose 4.4% in December and is up 10.8% over the last year. That is a big number. That's not a little fluctuation. That's the kind of year-over-year increase that turns winter into a budget crisis, especially when combined with rising food costs. This is where fear becomes rational. If you're already stretched and the heating bill spikes, you don't have many places to cut without sacrificing something essential. And again, the report itself is telling you the pressure is not isolated. Shelter was the biggest factor in the monthly increase. Food had a hot month. Energy rose on the month, with gas service surging. That combination, housing, food, heat, is basically the survival trio of expenses. When those move together, people don't just complain. They change behavior, they delay medical care, they skip maintenance on cars, they eat less, they take on debt, they work more hours, they move in with family, they do desperate things. Now, let's go back to shelter for a moment. Because this is another area where the CPI headline can hide what people actually feel. The shelter index increased 0.4% in December. Owner's equivalent rent rose 0.3% in December, and rent also rose 0.3%. Lodging away from home rose 2.9% over the month, and over the last year, the shelter index is up 3.2%. Again, shelter inflation is not something you can ignore, because even a small percentage increase on a huge monthly bill is painful. The report also includes a detail that tells you something about how weird the data environment has been. It notes that October and November 2025 data values are not available due to a lapse in appropriations. That's not a small footnote. It means there's a gap in the normal monthly flow. And it can complicate comparisons and narratives that rely on smooth month-to-month trends. And when the data stream itself has interruptions, public trust gets even weaker, because people already feel like they're being told one thing while living another. Now, one of the most interesting lines in this report, something that sounds technical but is actually very human, is the difference between seasonally adjusted and not seasonally adjusted measures. The CPI index level is reported, and the report notes that for the month the index was unchanged prior to seasonal adjustment, even though it rose 0.3%. Seasonally adjusted. This is why people online argue past each other. One person is looking at a seasonally adjusted month-to-month change. Another is looking at the unadjusted index, and they think one side is lying. The BLS explains that seasonally adjusted data are usually preferred for short-term trends, because they strip out typical seasonal patterns, while unadjusted data reflect the prices people actually pay and are often used for escalation agreements. But the key point for your everyday listener is this: no matter how you adjust it, the grocery category moved sharply in December. And now, let's address the psychological impact, because it's not just about numbers, it's about timing and repetition. A 0.7% grocery jump in December comes at the worst possible time for many households, right after holiday spending. Right when winter energy bills peak. Right when many people are resetting budgets for the new year and hoping for relief. So it lands like a threat. You thought you could breathe in January, but the bills are still chasing you. This is also why people's fear is so sensitive to food inflation specifically. Food is the most frequent, visible, unavoidable purchase. And when the report tells you that both groceries and restaurants jumped 0.7% in a single month, it means your escape routes are closing. You can't just say, fine, I'll eat at home, because groceries rose. You can't just say, fine, I'll grab cheap fast food, because limited service meals rose 0.6% and full service meals rose 0.8% over the month. The inflation pressure is following you. Now, I want to highlight something else the report mentioned, because it shows how inflation can pop up in unexpected places while everyone is watching food and gas. The report says the recreation index increased 1.2% over the month, the largest one-month increase ever reported for that index, which was first published in 1993. Airline fares rose 5.2% in December. Medical care, apparel, personal care, education's several categories increased. In a normal year, you might shrug at some of these, but when essentials are already squeezing households, increases in secondary categories make people feel trapped, like every part of life is charging more admission. At the same time, the report notes some categories decreased. Communication declined 1.9% in December. Used cars and trucks fell 1.1%, and household furnishings and operations decreased 0.5%. Those declines are real and they matter in the macro picture. But here's the cold truth. If your grocery bill and your rent are rising, you damn't feel comforted by cheaper communication services or falling used car indexes, unless you actually in the market for those things. That's the gap between economic statistics and lived experience, and it's exactly why this CPI says stable narrative keeps failing to persuade people. So what should listeners take away from this report? In plain language, first, the 2.7% headline does not mean the cost of living crisis is over. It means the average rate of change over the last year is lower than it was at the worst moments, but the level of prices is still high, and essentials can still spike. Second, the December report shows a very specific kind of danger, a month where shelter, food and energy all push upward at once. And third, the grocery spike is broad-based, with 5 of 6 major grocery store food group indexes increasing, and other food at home jumping 1.6% in a month. Now, if you're listening to this and wondering, okay, what do I do with this information? The purpose here isn't to give personal finance advice, but to give you situational awareness. When you see a 0.7% monthly grocery move and 4.4% monthly utility gas service move in the same report, it's a signal that the next few months could feel volatile for household budgets, especially if winter energy stays elevated. It's also a signal to watch the next CPI release closely, because the BLS has already scheduled the January 2026 CPI for February 11, 2026. That date matters because a lot of narratives, market expectations, and political messaging will pivot on whether food cools back down or whether December was the start of another and that's why I opened with that CTA, and I'll say it again before we close. If you want this kind of breakdown every time the numbers drop, hit like, subscribe, and keep notifications on. Because the headlines are always going to simplify the story. And simplification is how people get blindsided. If you've made it this far, leave a comment for the next episode. What's the one grocery item that made you stop and stare at the price tag this month? One last thing, because it's important to keep this honest. The CPI is a statistical estimate, and the BLS includes a long technical note explaining that it's based on samples, subject to sampling error, and constructed using specific methods and weights. That doesn't mean it's fake. It means it's a tool, and like any tool, it tells you some truths clearly and others imperfectly. But the truth it tells very clearly this month is that the grocery store got hotter in December. Shelter kept climbing, and key utilities remain elevated and for millions of people, that is the only inflation story that matters.